Hello mamas, Laura here, and today we are chatting about matrescence, the period of transition when you journey from woman to mother. Enjoy!
Hey mama, I'm sending you wonderful pregnancy vibes. It's time for you to guide you through. Let's take some time for you. It's pregnancy with Physio Laura.
Hello mamas, and welcome back to the Pregnancy with Physio Laura podcast. Today we are kicking off the Matrescence Series, delving into the history of matrescence, what exactly this transition from woman to mother involves, and the biological, physical, social, and emotional changes that occurred during this transition from woman to mother. Now this is episode 1 of a 5-part matrescence series with the wonderful Nikki McCahon. Nikki is a matrescence educator who helps women embrace motherhood as a catalyst for personal transformation. She runs incredible motherhood circles, online programs, and an incredible podcast called the Dear Mama Project. She's also so beautifully spoken, and I could honestly listen to her voice all day long. There is so much powerful content coming up in this matrescence series, so if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Pregnancy with Physio Laura podcast so you don't miss out. In this matrescence series, we'll be chatting about the recent recognition of matrescence as a powerful transition period, much like adolescence, how we can help women to honour and respect this transition, practical tools and tips to help cushion the transition into motherhood, why the current societal expectations around bouncing back after birth need to be changed, managing the mental load of motherhood, and so much more. Now, we also have a bonus 6th episode exclusively available to members inside the Pregnancy Posse, where Nikki answers member questions around things like managing stress and anxiety, adjusting to a change in relationship with your partner after birth, and how we can lean more into our feminine energy to help bring more peace, calm, and balance into our motherhood journey. Now, this entire podcast series and all our other podcast series, along with any exclusive member-only content, is all live right now inside the Pregnancy Posse. So if you'd love to access all the bonus content and listen to or watch this entire series right now, rather than waiting for future episodes to come out, then please do check out the Pregnancy Posse. I have taken my years of experience helping pregnant and postnatal women as a women's health physiotherapist and turned it into an easy to understand online program. When you join the Pregnancy Posse, I will personally guide you week by week throughout your entire pregnancy with safe weekly workouts tailored to your specific week of pregnancy. I also do a weekly Q&A session where I answer every single question from my wonderful Posse members to help them avoid the dreaded Google rabbit hole. And there is also a lovely community forum where Posse members all support each other, along with an extensive resources library which helps to educate you on all topics related to pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum period. Now, I would love to help you have a healthy, active, pain-free pregnancy. So just head over to thepregnancyposse.com to see what the Pregnancy Posse is all about and to trial it for 7 days. Now, let's get into episode 1 of our 5-part matrescence series. You are going to love today's chat with Nikki as we dive into what exactly matrescence is. It is honestly one of the most fascinating topics I've personally encountered and one that I know you will love. Enjoy! Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, Nikki. I have been excited about recording this podcast with you for a long time. As we were talking about before we started, I think this topic is super fascinating to every female out there, not just pregnant women, but super underexposed. So women don't know about this, and I just think it is so vital for women to know more about matrescence, know more about their cycles, know more about their feminine energy. And I just think you've got a really lovely way of translating that message. You're very soft in your approach. You're very kind and genuine. And I personally love listening to you. I think you have such a nice voice. So thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for the beautiful welcome.
Yes, no, it's very exciting. And as I was saying before, I feel like I could talk to you for hours about this. So we hit record so that we don't miss out on any juicy goss. But I know a lot of women listening to this will never have heard the term matrescence before. And I know it's only a really recent term that I've stumbled across on another podcast. I heard about it. Mm-hmm. And then I've seen a lot of your information you've been popping out there. So for those women who have absolutely zero understanding of this, can you just take us right back to the basics? what is matrescence? Where did this term come from? What do we need to know about it?
Yeah, okay, awesome. We'll start at the very beginning. So the word matrescence was coined by an anthropologist, Dana Raphael, in the 1970s, and she used the word to talk about how birth doesn't make a mother out of a woman. The amount of time it takes to become a mother requires study. So that was the first time that she sort of used that word and talked about how women don't just become mothers through the act of birth. There's a developmental process that needs to happen around that to prepare her for becoming a mother. So she also coined a word, doula, and that's a word that we all kind of know in the motherhood space. But this word matrescence, she created it, and then it just was kind of like buried in the textbooks. It was never really gained popularity and became a part of our language and our culture with motherhood. And then this amazing woman, Dr. Aurelie Athen, who is a clinical psychologist and a lecturer and researcher at Columbia University, also noticed through her own research, she was studying reproductive cancers in women, and she was noticing how women were having these big transformations through these experiences. And she then thought, I'll apply the same kind of concept to birth. And she started looking through the birth literature, trying to find, what happens to women when they become mothers? What's the woman's experience of becoming a mother? And all of the information really kind of focused on the child's experience of the mother. So there's so much, and even like you would know through your motherhood journey, and I noticed through mine, that there's such a focus on the child after you have your baby. And there's really very little informational resources that talk about how we change when we become mothers. And we know that we do, but we don't have that sort of language or understanding about, how am I changing and why am I changing? And without that, sometimes it can feel really disorientating and negative. Like I remember thinking like, there must be something wrong with me, that I'm not the same person that I was before. And so she was looking through all of this research and she found this word matrescence, and immediately was like, this is what I've been searching for. And she started applying the concept of matrescence and really digging into women's experience of motherhood. And that was basically how the word was revived or found. She has a lab at Columbia University and teaches about matrescence. She writes papers about it, and she's really like the world-leading researcher on matrescence. And I think that one of the best or the easiest ways to understand matrescence, because as you said, so many of us have never heard of this word before, and it's sort of sounds, matrescence, what does that really mean? Is matrescence is really similar to adolescence. So we understand that adolescence is the developmental passage that we go through when we are going from child to adult, and matrescence is the developmental passage that we go through when we're going from woman to mother. So if we just start there, if you think about adolescence, what was your experience of adolescence from memory?
The first word that came to my mind was pimples, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
I think I remember getting my period.
Yeah.
I don't remember that being a big deal as such. I remember it just being like this awkward transitional phase.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like a big celebration or welcome into womanhood. And yeah, I remember feeling really pimply and awkward, and they're probably my main memories of transitioning into adolescence. Is that terrible?
No, pretty common, I think. Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, there's like the pimples, there's the hormonal fluctuations, you feel awkward, you can feel a bit insecure, you're starting to maybe think about, who do you want to be? Like, what's my identity? There's this big piece around identity. You're trying to fit in with different social groups, and we're looking to others to kind of define ourselves, or looking to the culture or what we're interested in to give ourselves this new kind of identity. We might be making new friends, moving away from other relationships. The hormonal fluctuations are huge. Body image is also really big. Our body's changing, and it's like sort of weird and awkward that we've got these, different body pieces. We might be like just changing. We might be just feeling like, I think awkward and insecure is a really, really big piece. And it's kind of similar with motherhood and with matrescence, like your body is changing. You might be having a new relationship with your body as being like a reproductive body. We might be maybe, we might feel more kind of connected to our body. We might feel a little bit less connected to our body. Like some women go through motherhood and they're like have this newfound appreciation of their body. For other people, it can be really hard to adjust to the physical changes. Identity is huge. So we might be trying to find our place in the world. Maybe the things that we identified with before aren't really the things that we're connecting with anymore. Social relationships are changing. So we might be having friendships that maybe don't really fit anymore. We might be meeting lots of new friends that are kind of we're connecting with because we're in this same stage of life. Our significant relationships with our partners might be changing a little bit. Relationships with family members as well. Like sometimes it might be that we're removing toxic people from our life, or it might be that we've had relationships that have been a bit strained in the past that are now becoming stronger. We're also starting to ask like big questions like, who am I? What does all this mean? What's my place in the world? There's so many sort of parallels, I think, between adolescence and matrescence, and Dr. Aurelie Athen is the one who kind of came up with that term. But I think it's a really good place to kind of start to think about matrescence as being this stage of growth where we're feeling a little bit awkward, we're a little bit unsure of ourselves, our bodies are changing, and that is a normal developmental process. Like we understand adolescence as being a growth stage, it's about us transforming and moving forward. And it's the same thing with matrescence, although sometimes it really doesn't feel like that. It can obviously feel really hard and difficult as well, but it's about us moving forward and transforming and growing into the next stage of our lives.
And I feel like if the people listening to this podcast right now stopped listening, they would already have gained so much insight into the idea of how much change is actually happening. And what you were saying earlier, I think really sticks with me now of feeling like we're not the same person, because we actually aren't. So this whole concept of bouncing back or not losing yourself in kids, I see that a lot, that message in society about, make sure you don't change once you have kids and make sure you stay true to who you are and all of this. And that's really challenging for a lot of women to wrap their head around when you've just listed off all these changes that are actually happening. And instead of fighting those changes, that we should be actually leaning into them, because it's not about losing who we are. It's about shedding layers and growing and developing. And it's not a bad thing. Like, it's actually not a bad thing. And I love that you've just explained all of that, because it's not about resisting those changes. And it might feel awkward. It might feel funky. It might feel negative, but it's actually, first of all, like a rite of passage. It's something that is actually to be celebrated and felt. I just find that also fascinating. Now, you listed off so many different changes that happen. I'd also love to delve into, because I find this so fascinating, our brains actually change. So could you talk to us about the actual, because for those out there who maybe are still finding this hard to understand, I think sometimes when you throw facts, MRI studies, those sorts of things, it's hard to deny that. So could you talk us through some of those physical changes that actually occur?
Yeah. So if we look at the biological changes, so during pregnancy, our brains start producing more hormones, but we also grow an organ, the placenta, which is like an incredible organ. It obviously nourishes the baby, it buffers the baby from stress, and it produces a lot of hormones. So during one single pregnancy, a woman will be exposed to more estrogen in one single pregnancy than she will the combined total of the cycles for the rest of her life. So 1,000 times the amount of estrogen in one single pregnancy than in a normal cycle. You're also getting 15 times the amount of progesterone you would get in a normal cycle.
Wow.
Plus you're getting oxytocin, prolactin, a whole bunch of chemicals. Beautiful chemical cocktail is then drenching the mother's brain in all of these sex hormones, which then cause changes to the brain structure. So it's a pruning and a refining of the brain in the areas that are related to social cognition, theory of mind, empathy, being able to read facial cues, being able to think about how other people think or feel. And really, it's really all based around these sort of nurturing kind of skills, things that we need for the task of mothering. So there was a study done, I can't remember where it was in Europe, where they scanned 25 women before they became mothers, and then they scanned them again after they had their babies, and then they scanned them again 2 years afterwards. And the changes that they saw in the women's brains were long lasting. So they lasted longer than the 2 years. So these changes that are happening during pregnancy are essentially like sculpting women's brains and preparing them for motherhood, and they're long-lasting changes. So I find that super fascinating for a couple of reasons. The first is that I think there's such a strong message and social conditioning around, mummy brain, and like, oh, she's just a mum now and she's forgotten. And there's this kind of thing in the workplace around, mothers maybe not being as focused, mothers not being as dedicated or equipped or to do the job that they were doing before. Whereas you look at this, women's brains are actually being sculpted and refined, making them better at those softer kind of skills of, being compassionate, being empathetic, being able to juggle multiple things and prioritize how other people are thinking and feeling. So that's a huge skill. So let's stop talking about, women as having, some sort of deficit from motherhood. It's actually an incredible, gift that they're being bestowed through pregnancy. So I think that's really fascinating. But as well, like just being able to talk about that with the people around you and let them know the gravity of the change that is happening to a woman through pregnancy. So that's huge, and that's going to have an impact on how she's feeling and thinking and how she's responding to situations. I feel like with motherhood, we feel things so much more deeply. Do you relate to that everything feels
100%.
Yeah.
Like, I don't watch mainstream news anymore anyway, but I would be triggered by a random like Home and Away episode, and I didn't even know the characters, or I remember like seeing my son at the park, and it was not even a big deal, but some of the other kids were like, ha ha ha, look at that baby. And I was like, oh, don't you call him a baby? Like, I was just in this hyper, like, mother bear, protect my child sort of mode. 100%. And I love what you're saying in that it's flipping it on its head. Like, we're being told that that's like a negative thing of motherhood, like mum brain, you're not going to be as smart or as intellectual, you become this fuzzy, forgetful. It's actually amazing. Like, it is actually something to be celebrated, because your brain has changed so that you can be the best mother to your child, so that you can tune into your child. And I was actually having this conversation with my husband the other day. So my children are not newborns anymore. They're a little bit older. They're still quite young. But I was saying to him, because I've just recently learned about these things through you, we're having a conversation at dinner, and he's always trying to have an intellectual conversation with me over the dinner table. And I said to him, J.A., Pia is crying. Mussy is asking me for something. I literally cannot focus on what you're saying right now. And I don't think he feels the same. So I think he can not shut them out. He's like the best dad ever. But I think in his brain, he can have that conversation, whereas my brain is like,
Pia, Mussy. Like I can't hold the space for anything outside of that because my children need me right now. And I find that really fascinating. And now I lean into that. I'm like, oh, it's not that I'm ignoring my husband, or it's not that I can no longer have an intellectual conversation. It's just that like I'm so wired to respond to them and respond to their needs almost before I even know they need them. So I notice another difference with my husband and I is that I almost like preempt what they need. It's like I'm tuned in to what they need before they even need it. Whereas I find with him, it's like 5 minutes later, oh, is that what you need? And I'm like, couldn't you see that? Like, it wasn't that obvious. And it's just these little subtle things I'm starting to pick up on. Whereas like my brain has changed and I genuinely do feel like I respond differently to, and it's not a good or a bad thing. I'm not saying like pro, female, anti-male, anything like that. It's just so fascinating to then start to notice those differences. And it aligns with everything that you just mentioned about those brain changes. And I just think it's so important to flip this narrative on its head. And it's not a bad thing. Women are not less intelligent. They're actually just amazing for having done all of this. And then to go to work and juggle it all and be able to, still have their mum brain, but still have their work brain. I just think it's about taking that pressure off, really, isn't it? Like that. Oh, anyway, I'm hijacking it. So,
I was just going to say, I think that it's important to we get, if you are carrying a baby and you're pregnant, you're going to get these hormones, you can have those brain changes. And that's basically like a bit of a shortcut for developing those skills. But it doesn't mean that you have to be the birth mother or you have to be the mother to be able to develop those skills. I think it's important to sort of acknowledge that because we don't want to let dads off the hook as well. Yes. And that they can still develop those skills and those sort of pathways in their brain to be able to understand what others are thinking and feeling, but it needs to be from the environment. They need to be exposed to those situations where they're having to develop those pathways in their brain that help them, do those behaviors. It has to be an environmental sort of exposure, whereas through pregnancy, we're getting a biological sort of shortcut or a helping hand to be able to do those behaviors. But yeah.
And I did want to talk about how different styles of parenting, so it may be that it's not your biological child, how it is still a developmental passage to go through matrescence, because like you said, biology is just one factor of the matrescence development. So before we move on to that, is there any other changes that you wanted to cover when it comes to that matrescence passage? And
I think we've pretty much covered them all, but in terms of biology, as we said, there'll be a changing relationship with your body. So it might be that you feel a bit awkward in your body. It might be that you have a newfound appreciation for your body. And everyone's experience of matrescence is going to be different. So there's going to be so many varying pieces. There's always common threads that we might both feel the same way about certain things, but your experience of it is going to be a bit different to mine. So it is unique to us how we move through it. And then I think the one that, that I'm excited about and that I find the most liberating, empowering, but it's also the most scary, I think, for a lot of people, is the change to identity, that question of who am I now, and feeling like our old values or our old life doesn't fit anymore. And you're sort of in this in-between space where you're like, I'm not who I was before, I'm still me, but I don't really know who that is anymore. And I feel like, as you said, there's so much pressure to go back to who you were before. And that really means that as women, we lose this incredible opportunity to redefine who we want to be. And for so many of us, we were talking a little bit about it before we started recording, is that we are indoctrinated into a culture that tells us there's one way to be, and it's to be super successful at a career and to earn heaps of money and to do this and to look a certain way and to, this is what it means to be a woman. Whereas through matrescence, and it's not just through matrescence, there can be other things that happen to us in our life, but matrescence, I think, is a really powerful one. We have this incredible opportunity to really sit back and go, well, I don't know who I am anymore. That doesn't feel right to me anymore. Who do I want to be? Like, let me lean into this transformation. Let me lean into this transition and really embrace it and let this change me. Like, let it change me. Let me be changed by this experience. And I think without language around matrescence and without acknowledging that, yes, you are changing and it's scary sometimes, but it's also a really beautiful opportunity, we miss that chance to really redefine who we want to be. So I think if that's the only thing anyone took out of this podcast, it would be this is really hard, but it's also a beautiful opportunity to give yourself a chance to change and transform and redefine who you want to be outside of what you've been told to be by society or the culture.
Oh, so good. Yes, I agree. If that's all you took out of it, that is just lean in, like it doesn't need to be something you resist. And like you said, I think with most things in life anyway, isn't it? Like when it feels yucky, when it feels hard, that's actually the time to lean in. That's not the time to run away and resist and try and blow it under the carpet. Like that's when to lean in. And I'm sure you've felt the same or experienced the same, but so many women who all of a sudden start questioning their careers when they are on maternity leave. And I guess I used to think about that more as like physical space away from the workplace. But now that you're explaining all of this, it's so much more than just stepping outside of the office and having, time and space to think about what they want to do. It's so much deeper than that. It's actually questioning identity and values and morals and where they want to go in the future and how that fits in with their new transition. And I just think there's something really magical about that period of time. For most women, you are having a chunk of time off. And if we can think about it differently, I just think that's super powerful.
Hey mamas, Laura here. Can you see why I find the topic of matrescence so fascinating? This knowledge of how gigantic this transition period is would really help so many new mums out there who are struggling with the unexpected changes that motherhood brings up. And I think this information is so powerful to know now whilst you're still pregnant so that you can be prepared for the life shift you're about to undertake. If you'd like to learn more from Nikki, please do go check out her amazing resources and find her on Instagram at Dear Mama Project. And I'd also love to hear from you over on my socials at PhysioLaura. And please let me know your favorite learnings from today's episode and if you are as equally fascinated with this topic as I am. In the next few episodes of this Matrescence series, we will be chatting with Nikki about how to redefine yourself after birth and the questions you may want to consider asking yourself now while still pregnant, tips and tricks to cushion the transition into motherhood, why the current societal expectations around mums bouncing back is toxic and needs to change, and managing the mental load of motherhood. And if you haven't already, just subscribe to the Pregnancy with PhysioLaura podcast so that you never miss any of our amazing upcoming episodes in this wonderful Matrescence series. And if you loved today's episode and you want to dive deep into the next 4 episodes straight away, then you can find this entire series along with all our other podcast series live right now inside the Pregnancy Posse. For most series of the podcast, we also record exclusive bonus content for Pregnancy Posse members. And in the bonus member-only episode for this Matrescence series, Nikki talks us through managing stress and anxiety, adjusting to a new relationship with your partner after birth, and ways that we can step into our feminine energy more easily after birth. Inside the Pregnancy Posse, you'll also find weekly guided pregnancy workouts, an extensive resources library on birth preparation, pelvic floor exercises, and managing pregnancy pains and injuries, plus a wonderful community forum and weekly Q&A sessions with myself. Now, I would love to help you have a wonderful pregnancy, birth, and postnatal experience. So just visit thepregnancyposse.com to see what the Pregnancy Posse is all about and to trial it for 7 days. I will catch you soon for episode 2 in this 5-part Matrescence series, where we'll be chatting about redefining yourself after birth and the different questions that may pop up as you transition through this period. Until then, mamas, sending you wonderful pregnancy vibes and enjoy the incredible journey that is pregnancy.